All right, something that is important to explore when you're starting to engage clients is that you might have a client who is resistant to treatment. And so not everybody who comes into us is excited to see us, and we cannot take that personally. Instead, we want to understand what's causing the behavior in order to be able to kind of figure out how to work towards a solution. Some different types of resistance, they might just not want to be there, and they're being forced to because an employer or a significant other or somebody is encouraging them to, and there's some negative consequence if they don't attend, and so their motivation isn't necessarily internal, it's more external. Some clients are required by the courts like mental health court or even criminal justice court, they might be mandated to receive treatment. And so there's a level of resistance there because someone else, again, is making the choice for them versus them. So what we want to do is understand what resistance is. So resistance really is a defense. And it's a defense, and defense is a response to a potential threat. So often when people seek services, the status quo or their kind of normal functioning is being challenged. So in most instances, challenging is necessary in order to be a healthier individual. But if people are not on board with changing their current functioning, it's the resistance is kind of their way to self-preserve the status quo. So therapy can be really scary because we're looking to challenge that. And even the clients who do identify the need for help, so they're not necessarily being forced to come, sometimes they're maladaptive. So maladaptive basically means like unhealthy situation is familiar. And even though it's unhealthy, the comfort of it has created some sort of safety for them. And so the thought of changing that is very, very scary. So I think of often if someone's like in an abusive relationship, obviously there's some a lot of unhealthy things going on and even like lack of safety. However, it's familiar. It's comfortable. I don't really know like that word really in this context, but it's what's known. And there's also might be some sort of fear for leaving the situation. And so it almost in their mind feels safer to stay for many, many multiple reasons. So understanding the context that resistance is a defense to something that seems like a threat kind of helps reframe a difficult client. And so usually under threat, people resist. And so perception is narrowed, which makes it difficult for people to consider all the elements in a person's experience or environment. So if you think of basic biology, fight or flight, if someone feels like they're under threat, they're in survival mode versus higher thinking, logical, conceptual thinking. All right. So this just kind of fleshes out a little bit more that resistance isn't always stubbornness. There's a lot of fears or different elements that are underlying resistance. So if you're a failure, what if I do all this therapy and nothing changes? It's better to not even try. If you're taking risks, resistance can be manipulation. So this can be attached to some personality disorders like narcissism. So trying to just maintain control of the environment, a way to manipulate into getting what they want. It can be passive aggressive. There might be shame in seeking services if the identified thing that they're identifying that they need to work on or want to work on is something shameful or feel shameful. They might not want to talk about it because then they have to deal with all the icky feelings associated with that. There might be jealousy or desire to sabotage the relationship, so some self-preservation in there. Maybe they're just really tired and the thought of actually dealing with stuff feels really overwhelming. And so they just don't have the physical or mental capacity at the moment to address things. Might be a personality style. And it might just be someone who enjoys resisting because they get a rise out of people. And again, it's a way of establishing some sort of power and control in what might feel like a very out of control situation. So just things to think about, not necessarily justifying the resistance, but helping understand the resistance. So how on earth do we navigate this without it turning into a power struggle, without it turning into something that is combative? And a really good place to start is focus on the emotion, that accompanies the solution. So that's a very wordy thing, and you kind of have to read through it a couple of times to understand it. And basically what that means is one of the main reasons that clients come into therapy is because they don't know the solution to their problems, or they do know the solution, but the solution itself seems very terrifying. So the emotion that's accompanying what the identified solution is just feeling very fearful and very scared to try something new, or again, to change the status quo. So our role is to validate the fears surrounding the solution, and support the client's courage to move forward in the midst of the perceived and impending terror. So if a client is being resistant, don't really want to say, like, doesn't want to engage in conversation, doesn't want to be problem or solution focused, you can reflect back like, hey, it seems like there's something, like, it seems very scary to have to think about leaving that individual, or it seems really scary to quit using cocaine after you've been using for 10 years. Like, that's a huge lifestyle change. You might miss your friends. You might X, Y, and Z. So validating that there's a level of fear around it versus being like, why don't you want to quit? You should quit, is more empowering, and it helps the client feel heard, and it's taking the focus off of what they are doing or not doing and focusing on what they're feeling. Because sometimes focusing too much on solutions, client is just not ready to go there, and it increases the fear. Another way to manage resistance is called the Columbo Technique. So there was a TV show where there was a detective. His name was Columbo, and it gets kind of modeled off how he would talk to some of his people he was interviewing to try to solve the mysteries. It really takes the approach that the provider is kind of, I want to say, dumb. You're kind of playing stupid to get the client to actually answer their own question or identify the solution on their own. So the greater the resistance, it's more likely that they will refuse to hear any solution that you might offer. So this often happens if you have kids and you're trying to tell them to do something, they just don't want to hear it. And so if you're telling a client, like, trying to give them a solution, they're just not ready to hear it because they're so resistant. They're just going to shut everything down. Sometimes the answer is very obvious to us because we are not in it and we know that doing X, Y, or Z will help. Us talking more about it isn't going to convince them. So we need to back off and kind of not throw them out there, but play stupid. So it's called reversing the paradox. So you just kind of play really naive. So if they are struggling with time management and you are like, you just need to set an alarm and that will really help you. Instead of throwing that out there, you can be like, man, it really does seem like there's no solution to this. Or, man, it really seems like there's nothing you can do anymore. Like, all the options you have tried just are not going to work. Like, man, I don't know how we would solve this. And so sometimes it can backfire, you hope, because the client's like, yep, see, there's no point in being in therapy. So you have to use it very tactfully, or kind of know your audience and know how to work it into conversation. But playing kind of stupid or being like, yeah, I'm not sure what to do, they might get annoyed with you and be like, no, all you have to do is this. And then, oh, look, you just said the answer. So it's kind of a controversial technique at times. You have to do it correctly. But it is one way to kind of like, it's like the reverse psychology mentality of having them identify the solution to convince you that's what they should do versus you trying to convince them. Honestly, a lot of times you just need to deal with individuals who are resistant with a lot of empathy. Because we're solution focused, sometimes we want to go on logic and questioning, and we miss out a little bit on the personal and relational aspect because we just want to fix things so bad. So sometimes just sitting with somebody and identifying how they're feeling gives them more reason to change, because if you focus too much on the logic of the situation, it isn't necessarily a motivator, but having an emotionally compelling reason to change will help an individual become more motivated. But because, like we said in the things we covered in class today, or on Monday, because I don't know when you're watching this, so we covered on Monday that sometimes, like, we have to deal with those deep feelings and that our clients are going to have to kind of go there. Sometimes the emotions are blocked or they just aren't ready to deal with those uncomfortable feelings. And so we need to be able to help clients become comfortable with sitting with those emotions before we can expect them to change. And so empathy is the tool that fosters the emergence of emotionally compelling reasons for change, and then ignites and fans a fire for change. And so going back to a client who might be using cocaine and they're trying to find motivation to change after using for 10 years, maybe they're going to be a grandma soon. And so if they don't stop using, they might not be able to see their grandkid. And so pulling on like, how would you feel if you could never see your grandkid, and kind of having like that emotional piece for motivation versus like just pulling out a pamphlet of all the harms of cocaine. Trying to find an emotional compelling reason will help motivate more quickly than sometimes logic. And baby steps are no joke. And so you might intend for your client to completely be sober from all substances. That's your goal, that's how you could see them living a fulfilled life. But sometimes that's too big and too overwhelming at first. And so focusing on the small victories. So we would do this a lot with clients who were going through a smoking cessation program. Expecting someone to quit cigarettes cold turkey is very, very difficult. The addictiveness of nicotine is so high. Going from maybe a pack a day to none is just too much, and it might cause the client to feel disappointed or discouraged or not motivated at all. So looking at like the steps of harm reduction of like, hey, instead of smoking a pack, I'm only going to smoke half a pack. Okay, they're still not technically smoke free, but they're reducing and they're showing that they can do it. So trying to even focus on the smallest move possible can be really powerful, because it shows the client they can do it, and that might prompt them into more change. And it takes pressure off of you as a problem solver, because we can't fix the situation, wave this magic wand immediately. And so they're going to have to take steps to reach an end goal. So celebrating those victories can be very, very powerful. Stages of change. So this is one of my most favorite clinical tools. I'm trying to move myself so I'm not on anybody. Okay. So this is largely based in substance use treatment, where you look at the stage of change, but it can be applied to any sort of situation. I stage of change myself all the time. Like, I'll throw out a normal conversation with people. I'm like, I'm just so contemplative right now, because it makes so much sense to me, and it really helps keep it client focused and meeting clients where they're at. So the 5 different stages of change are pre-contemplative, contemplative, preparation, action, and maintenance. And so if you're meeting a client who is resistant, they are more than likely in the pre-contemplative stage. So they're in denial that they need services. They have no desire to receive services, and they're very vocal about that, and are not ready to make any change at all. So at that point, that's where you would just kind of sit with the client, build engagement, kind of sit with that empathy, help identify some of the emotional connections to the resistance. And you're really looking to see how you can build a relationship to utilize that to move them into the contemplative stage. So this is where they're kind of thinking about it. They've identified that, yeah, a change could be beneficial, but they're just not ready to actually make a change yet. So you sit with the ambivalence, you weigh those pros and cons of like, well, if you don't do it, what would it look like? If you do it, what would it look like? Which seems more beneficial? What are you feeling? And so it gives you a little bit more teeth to like grab onto, but the client still isn't quite ready, but they've at least verbalized that there might be a need for change. So once they're in the preparation stage, they are ready to start making changes. So this is where you would make the action plan. So if you're thinking about the general method, this is where you would really start to plan the interventions. You're not quite doing it yet, but they've identified that they're motivated and they want to make some specific change. The action stage is where they're actively engaging in the interventions that were established. And so if you're quitting cigarettes, this is where you're actively doing it, and you're reducing the amount of cigarettes that you're using a day. And then the maintenance stage is obviously where you have now achieved your goal and you're maintaining that change. You are no longer smoking and you're in a period of sobriety. You can be at the maintenance stage and you can have a relapse and go back to any of the other ones before. But this is going to be a very client-based perspective to take, and it really helps you as a clinician be able to sit with some of the resistance because it gives you a framework